Hi there, my name is Alex Fenske, and I'm the team leader at Keller Elite, and wanted to have an important conversation today about foreclosures and the impact that they may or may not have on the market here coming up in the near and far future. A lot of people in real estate are talking about how the current market conditions are unsustainable and they can't go on this way forever. And I'll agree that nothing lasts forever. The question is, how long does it go? When does it change, and why? And a lot of people are saying, hey, there's this big wave of foreclosures coming because there were economic problems. Those were very real. And so that's going to tank the market, or there's going to be a major correction. And you hear a lot of that narrative. And as far as I'm concerned, narratives for politicians and professionals need data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you on a little walk here through a lot of numbers and data and facts for us to take a look at what is likely to happen, as well as what may be possible or not possible in terms of foreclosures. If there is a wave, how big is it, and what will that change in the market? So that's what we're going to do. Now, I want to first summarize that ultimately what we're going to try to figure out is how many additional homes are going to hit the market as a result of foreclosures now that there's no more foreclosure bans in effect, and what effect might that have on pricing. That's ultimately what we want to know. And I'm going to have to walk through a few different questions in order to get to that. And so I'll take you along with me. We're going to figure out how many additional homes are likely to hit the market. We're going to figure out how many of them would be needed in order to bring our market balance back to a balanced amount of supply. And we're going to then do a scenario where we're talking about if demand drops off, because we know it won't last like this forever, what does that do? So those are the questions that we're going to answer here today. The approach I took is there's no assumptions in any of this. There's zero assumptions in any of what I'm about to go through. It's all based on actual data. And my data sources are as follows. I've got a lot of residential foreclosure data from the Institute for Housing Studies at DePaul University. They do a lot of foreclosure tracking. All of my market data I got from MRED LLC, which is the company that administers our multiple listing service here in northeastern Illinois. I got some mortgage default rate information from the St. Louis Fed, and the most recent foreclosure filing activity I obtained from ILFLS, which is the Illinois Foreclosure Listing Service. It is a foreclosure data firm. All of the data that we're going to go through is for Cook County, because that's the data I was able to get the same set from all of those different sources. So it's Cook County residential property, and that's single family homes and 2 to 4 unit properties. So that's what we're going through. It's all consistent. It's all for the same area. So there's no discrepancy there in the data sets. So let's lay a foundation really quickly. Number one, what causes real estate prices to change? There's a lot of narrative that people say about this too, and yet there are some facts about what causes prices to change. Ultimately, what it boils down to is housing supply. Now, housing supply, that term is a bit of a misnomer because it's a metric that factors in both supply and demand. So the way that we look at real estate supply is the number of homes available for sale. And the way that we look at demand is the number of properties that are closing. Because at any given time, you could have an unlimited number of homes that are available, but the way you measure how many people are buying them is by how many of them are closing. And so housing supply answers a theoretical question that says, let's first take a look at what we call the absorption rate, the number of homes that are being bought each month. And we say at the current absorption rate, how many months would it take for buyers to buy up all of the existing inventory, assuming that that no new inventory came on the market, right? So current absorption rate, how many months would it take to buy up all the existing inventory? Here's a simple example. If the absorption rate is 100 per month, meaning there's 100 homes closing per month in a given market area, and there's 600 homes available, how many months of supply is that? That's 600 divided by 100, that's 6. And that 6 months of supply is a balanced market. What we mean by that is that in a market where you're consistently running at about 6 months of supply, real estate prices will be staying pretty much flat, probably tracking with inflation, and that's about it. And the reason is that's just the number of sellers and the number of buyers that tends to be a stable balance. There's not a lot of competition from either side. There's no scarcity. And And so that's what we mean by housing supply. Now let's take a look at a couple other samples or a couple other examples of this. Let's say that the inventory was the same, 600 homes available, but that 200 are closing every month. Well, that means the absorption rate's 200. It would only take 3 months to buy up the existing inventory. That would be 3 months of housing supply, and that is a seller's market. Now, the reason this is what causes prices to change is because when there's more buyers than there are homes available, in this example, 3 months of supply, then buyers have to compete for the few scarcely available listings that are present. And what's the number one way that buyers compete to win a listing? The price. They offer a higher price. And so by that causality there, 3 months of supply causes prices to rise. On the flip side, let's again say 600 homes available, but now the absorption rate is only 50. That's half of our first example. In this case, 600 divided by 50 is 12. There would be 12 months of supply. And when there's 12 months of supply, that's very much a buyer's market. That means there's a lot more listings available than there are buyers. And now it's not the buyers competing for the scarce listings, it's the listings competing for the scarce buyers. And how do listings compete for scarce buyers? They lower their price, and their price aggressively, and those are the ones that sell. And so that 12-month supply creates downward pricing trends. So with all that foundation, oh, you know what? I'm going to sidetrack for 1 second. There's a lot of other questions and narrative around what causes those factors that contribute to supply being what it is, meaning what would make the absorption rate be 200 instead of 100 or 50 instead of 200? What causes that? And that gets into macroeconomics where you're talking about wage growth, employment, household creation, birth and death rates. There's a lot of things that go into that. But ultimately, the reasons that people buy and sell homes are primarily not financial. It's that way for investors, but that's a small portion of the market. Primarily, the reasons that people buy and sell homes are because of household creation or uncreation, right? Meaning people got married, people got divorced. People had kids when they didn't have them before, or the kids grew up and left the house, empty nesters. Death, estates, that is another reason. Job transfer, job promotion, those are all things that can cause people to buy a home. And those things are, and then the money in terms of what are mortgage rates, what are prices, that's sort of a contributing factor to how much they're able or willing to spend, or some other factors around how they buy. But the reasons they buy are primarily non-financial. So with all that said, we're not going to go into an analysis on what causes buyer demand and seller supply. What we're going to look at is that leading metric and what has to happen with supply in order to expect changes in pricing. Where are we now? So right now, if you look back over 2021, the full year average, there was a total number of 80,099 closed sales in this property category that we're talking about. That works out to an average of 6,675 a month. That's the absorption rate, 66.75 in Cook County. The average number of homes available, not under contract, and across the whole year was 16,140. Now I can tell you right now we're under 13,000. Inventory has been declining for the last few months. So the annual average is actually higher than the current reality, but we're working with the annual averages here, and it was 16,140. So if you take that number and divide it by the absorption rate of 66.75, you get months of supply of 2.42. 2.42 months of supply for residential property in Cook County using the last 12 months average. That is a seller's market, and that's why prices are still going up rather quickly. If you take a look at the most recent 30 days, that number would be even more skewed. If you took a look at different subsets of property, for example, you looked at single family houses in suburban Cook County, your supply might come in as low as a month, maybe even less. If you look at condos in the downtown area, you're looking at more 6 months of supply. So there's a lot of different things that contribute to that overall number, and yet that's the overall number right now, 2.42. Question number one, in order to get us to where we want to go, is how many additional homes do we think might come on the market because of foreclosures, now that foreclosures are allowed? We have to agree on a fact first here, which is that not all foreclosure filings turn into a property being sold. we all know that there's at least some considerable number of homes that enter into a workout program that is successful, do a loan modification of some sort, or they just reinstate the loan because they're able to get caught up, or they refinance now that they have equity or something like that. Not all foreclosure filings turn into foreclosed or sold properties. We've got data on this, fortunately, so we know how many. Most recently, if I look at the most recent numbers prior to COVID stopping foreclosures, which I'm looking at the calendar years 2018 and 2019, there was on average about 11,000. And I have the actual numbers, but I'm not going to go through every single number here. I'm going to give you the averages. About 11,000 foreclosure filings per year, and a little over 5,000 auctions that occurred, plus about 1,200 short sales that occurred during that same time period. So what that means is that about 50% of the foreclosure filings ended up at the auction. An additional 11 to 12% of foreclosure filings were sold as short sales. Add those two numbers up, and it's really about 62% of foreclosure filings that resulted in a property being sold. That's a really important number. We're going to come back to that number quite a lot here through the rest of this conversation. So store that in your brain. 62% of foreclosure filings turn into a property being sold. Now that was 2018, 2019, a very healthy market, seller's market, although not quite as much as it is today. I wanted to see, does that number hold steady in the different market conditions? And so what I did is I looked at 2008 to 2012, right? Very, very different market. Housing supply at that time, depending on how you sliced it, was well into the double digits. In some areas, some property types, 24, 32 months of supply. It was crazy. So I wanted to take a look at that and what's going to show up here in this filing data. What I found is that on average, and the numbers ran very consistently through that time period, on average you had about 43,000 foreclosure filings happening per year in Cook County, a little over 15,000 auctions per year, a little over 11,000 short sales being completed each year at the time. So the way the percentages shake out, about 35% of foreclosure filings ended up at the auction. Another 26% of foreclosure filings ended up as short sales. So those two numbers are different than our first example from more recent years. But when you combine them, 61% of foreclosure filings ended up being sold. It's the same number. So we're going to err a little on the high side. We're going to go with 62%. So that is an important number that's going to drive the rest of this conversation. And we've verified that it is consistent in different market conditions. So how many foreclosures are being filed right now? Well, most recently, in December 2021, which is the most recent current data that I have for Cook County, there were 182 new foreclosure cases filed in Cook County. 182 in all of Cook County in December. Now remember, there's no restrictions anymore on filing foreclosures. Banks can file at will. 182. Annualized, that's 2,184 foreclosure filings per year, which is down 80% compared to the pre-COVID norm. Now, part of that must be that banks probably just haven't gotten caught up yet on their filings, and I have to imagine that's the case. And yet there is not a large number. It's not like, oh, hey, we're filing tons of foreclosures more than we were before. We're not. That's not happening. It's not even close to happening. So based on the current pace of filings, if you use that same 62% ratio, and we assume that 62% of the foreclosure filings that are happening now are going to end up as listings, how many listings will we get? 2184 times 62%, 1,354 additional listings per year, which is 113 per month for all of Cook County. Now, I probably can think of 113 buyers right now that have been looking for a home and need one and would take that inventory right up and it would go away immediately. All that would do is increase our average inventory from 16,140 to 16,253. It's a 0.7% increase. It's nothing. And remember, 16,140 is an annual average. We're under 13,000 right now. So this is not even a drop in the bucket. Looking at that housing supply metric, if we assume level demand, and we're going to come back on that assumption, if we assume level demand, this ratio would move our months of supply from 2.42 months to 2.43 months. Underwhelming, to say the least. Now we're gonna play around with some of these assumptions because of course that we're assuming that the number of filings happening right now is in some sort of a ramp up, right? That's a very low number, so we don't want to say that's going to stay consistent. We want to say, well, what happens when foreclosure filings get back to normal? Or the question I want to answer is, what number of foreclosure filings would we need to see in order to expect enough inventory to come on the market that it would bring the market back into balance at 6 months of supply? So how many filings lead to the number of listings available to get us back to a balanced market? That's where we're going next. Using those same numbers that we talked about before, the absorption rate of 66.75 a month, to find 6 months supply, we just take that absorption rate times 6. How many listings would that be? That would be 40,050 active listings that we would need in order to be at 6 months supply with our current absorption rate. We currently are averaging 16,140 listings available, and so we would need an additional 23,910 listings available at all given times in order to be at 6 months of supply. That's a lot. I mean, it's way more than double what we have right now. So what we would need using that 62% ratio, we take our 23,910 listings that we need to add in, divide that by the 62% of filings that end up as inventory, and that says we would need 38,565 foreclosure filings to happen this year. That's nearly as many as the number that were filed in 2008. It was 41,396 filed in 08. So what we're saying is that we would need to see 2008 level foreclosure filing activity in order to expect enough listings to come on the market to bring us back to 6 months supply. And by the way, the foreclosure process in Cook County averages 12 to 15 months. So even if this scenario happened, and I'm sure you would agree it seems pretty outlandish, you're talking about the summer of 2023 that we might get to a balanced market or start, because that inventory wouldn't start coming on the market until the foreclosures were completed, other than the short sales, which tends to be a smaller percentage of them. So that number of filings is outlandish. I mean, what happened in 2008 was unprecedented, and every economist and housing expert you can listen to will tell you that nobody is expecting this to look like 2008. We had a very deep economic interruption that then recovered very quickly. Now, I know not everybody's out of the woods, and yet most people are. In fact, the problem is on the opposite end of the spectrum, with the Fed trying to now take more drastic actions to control inflation, which is running out of control because the economy is running very hot. There's a lot of money out there flowing. There's a lot of pressure on wages to go up. There's a labor shortage. You know, the problem right now is not that people don't have enough money to pay their mortgages, it's that everyone's got too much money and they're spending it like crazy. Those are the problems we're having right now. So we would need to see more than triple the number of foreclosure filings that were happening before COVID, the 2018-19 rate. We need to see more than triple the number of filings, or more than 17 times the current pace, in order to expect that sort of inventory to come on the market. That doesn't seem likely, but again, we're not making any assumptions. So what is it that causes a bank to file for foreclosure? The owner, the borrower, stops paying the mortgage. It's called a mortgage default. Good news is we track that too. The St. Louis Fed has great data on mortgage default rates. And so if we can look at default rates, that can tell us where foreclosure filings are likely headed. If we need to see 2008 level filings, then it stands to reason we would need to see 2008 level default rates, right? Not an assumption, that's just a fact. So according to the St. Louis Fed, in 2008, the default rate in the first quarter was 3.68%. So 3.68% of all loans that they're tracking were in default. It doesn't sound like a high number, but at scale, it's a lot of homes, and it's only going up from there. It finished the year at 6.57% in 2008. So throughout the year, it averaged to 4.97%. The most recent default rate we have as of right now is for the third quarter of 2021. It was 2.27% and falling. In fact, with the exception of the second and third quarters of 2020, when COVID was brand new and the economy was literally shut down, with those 2 quarters as an exception, the mortgage default rate has remained flat or fallen every quarter since 2012. the default rate has been falling every quarter since then. There was 1 or 2 quarters where it was flat, but it's fallen every other quarter except second and third quarter of 2020, which was exceptional for good reason. So in order to see default rates get to where we could expect filings to be that high, we would need to see the default rate jump 62% immediately right now, and we need to see it triple within the next year. Now, is that likely? Well, based on the fact that default rates have been consistently declining both before, during, and I don't know if you want to call it after COVID, they've been, with those 2 quarters as an exception, they've been declining the entire time, COVID or not. Can we expect that rate to triple in the next year? Well, there's no information that says that's likely to happen. Again, this scenario seems very outlandish to see our default rate triple in the next 12 months to cause so many foreclosure filings that inventory could come back into balance. And then we're not even talking about getting it over 6 months into a buyer's market where prices would fall. We're just talking about getting it back to a balanced market where prices would remain flat. And it's outlandish, right? So that's the answer to our second question. How many filings would we need to see to get to balanced? Now I want to take out the last assumption that we know is reasonable to expect to change, which is demand. So I'm going to run a new scenario. Third question, if demand were to drop by 20%, then how many filings would we need to balance the market? Now, I'm sure this is the one you're waiting for because that's what's caused this. This situation that we're in, it's primarily not because of a lack of new listings coming on the market. In fact, all through COVID, the number of new listings has been in many cases equal to the prior years. In some cases, I would say most commonly about 8% below, which is a change, but it's not like half the number of homes have been getting listed. The reason inventory is down so drastically and in the last 2 months has hit consecutive all-time record lows in our MLS is because of excess demand, sustained excess demand over the course of, coming up on 2 years here, where buyer activity has been up for most months 20 to 25% more than it typically is. And so if you have about the same number of sellers coming on the market, but you have 25% more buyers every month, month in, month out, eventually it just whittles down the inventory to the point where we are right now. So what's led us here is not necessarily a shortage of listings, it's an excess of buyers. And so let's take that excess out and see what happens. What I did is I said, let's knock out 20% of the demand. Now, for context, here's what that would do. That would take the number of closed sales down from just over 80,000 to 64,079. In order to go back in time to see when was that the absorption rate? When was the last year that we did 64,000 as a trailing 12-month average? You'd have to go all the way back to July 2013 to get back to that. The absorption rate's been climbing since then. So July 13, again, for context, that was just 7 months after our market in our MLS bottomed out. Many markets bottomed out before us. In this market, being northeastern Illinois, Cook County, prices and everything bottomed in December 2012, and it began a climb after that. So to get to this absorption rate, you'd have to go back to just 7 months into our recovery from the Great Recession, darn near 10 years ago. So this is a big chunk taken out, all right? This is not a small assumption. We're taking a large chunk out of the market, and we're taking the absorption rate down to monthly 5,340 homes per month. How do you find 6 months supply? Multiply that by 6. So 5,340 times 6 is 32,040 active listings that we would need to have 6 months of supply, assuming demand is 20% lower than it is today. All right, so let's see what that looks like for filings. Our current inventory, 16,140. How many does it take to get to 32,040? It would take 15,900 additional listings. 15,900 additional listings divided by 62% of foreclosure filings that end up as listings means we would need to see 25,645 foreclosure filings annually in order to expect this amount of inventory. Now, I have to remind you, that's that's nearly 2.5 times as many as we saw in 2019. It's 12 times as many as the current pace of foreclosures. Um, and again, what can tell us how many foreclosure filings we're going to see? The default rate. Well, in 2019, the default rate was averaging 2.515%, and right now it's at 2.27% and falling. Now, 2.515 and 2.27 don't sound too far apart, but trust me when I say with with mortgage default rates, very small changes in that percentage work out to very big differences. Remember, 2008 started at 3.68%, and we were already, after the fall of 07, we're already seeing some significant financial problems. So we're at a significantly lower mortgage default rate than we were in 2019. It's still falling, and we're saying that if you take out 20% of the buyer demand, you'd still need to somehow see 2.5 times as many foreclosure filings as you saw in 2019, despite the fact that default rates are falling and already lower. It just doesn't sound like anything is going to make more than a drop in the bucket sort of change. And again, that's using inventory that's averaged over the last 12 months, not our current level of inventory, which is actually lower than that. So I'm sure you're seeing what I'm seeing, which is that there's not a single number metric anywhere in here that leads us to believe that a wave of foreclosures is coming that is going to make any kind of significant or even noticeable change in the balance of the market. Now, foreclosures are not the only thing at play. As we sit here today, it's February 17th. And mortgage interest rates have popped up by pretty much a point just in the last 2 months, not even 2 months. And the reason for that is that the Federal Reserve is trying to cool off the economy because inflation's out of control. So they're trying to cool it off. And the primary way they're doing that is they're injecting less money into the economy in areas that directly affect mortgage rates, among other things. So mortgage rates are primarily determined by 10-year Treasury bills and the secondary market for mortgage-backed securities. And with those two things, the Fed most recently has been purchasing a net of about $30 billion per month, and that's a lower number. They were purchasing a lot more right when COVID hit. They were like, we need to pump cash into this economy, and they were buying mortgage-backed securities and 10-year T-bills at a very high rate, and all of that stuff is what lowered mortgage rates. They've been tapering that off. They announced in November that they would begin tapering that. And then they said, hey, we're going to scoot up the timeline. We're going to be done with our net asset purchases by early March. And that's the most recent guidance from the Fed, is that by early March, they will be done buying mortgage-backed securities and 10-year T-bills. With that, mortgage companies have begun pricing those changes into their rates. And that's why rates have come up, like I said, from just over 3% to just over 4% just since the end of December. That is because of the Fed actions, not the federal funds target rate. That's not what's controlling mortgage rates. It's their net asset purchases that directly affect mortgage-backed securities and 10-year T-bills, which is a competitive product in the secondary mortgage market. So that's what caused mortgage rates to go up. It remains to be seen how much of that change has already been priced in. I suspect most of it, probably not all, but I would say probably most of that pricing has already been priced into the mortgage rates that you're seeing today. But we're going to find out in the next probably 3 weeks or so how much more rates are going to go up. Now, think back, though, to what we talked about at the beginning, which was what causes people to buy homes. It's not mortgage rates. It's just not. There were times I wished it would, because when it was a buyer's market and mortgage rates would drop, I would always hope that somebody would go, oh, now I'm going to buy a house. But it didn't happen. Mortgage rates do directly affect refinance activity, because with a refinance, you're only making a financial transaction. So the only considerations are financial. Will I have lower interest with the mortgage now? Yes. Okay, refi. So on days when mortgage rates drop, there's an immediate spike in refinance activity. And the inverse, when mortgage rates rise, there's an immediate drop in refinance activity. It's not that way with buyers. What it does is it takes out of the market anybody who was really on the fence. If they were barely stretching the limits of their affordability, and they were just on the line of being able to afford a home, in an area that they wanted, and now rates go up a point, they're out. That's not the majority of buyers, especially in a market like today where actually people have a lot of money on hand and you're seeing down payments go up, you're seeing more cash buyers. So that's happening, but it's a very small percentage of the market. And then the other thing it does is it takes the extra 20 or 30 grand out of somebody's pocket that they would use to bid up the price on something in a competitive offer scenario. So, it's going to cost me more now to pay that extra. So I might cool off how much I'm going to offer. And so those things are already happening. But what's crazy is inventory is still gone down and it's lower than it's ever been. So you're still seeing lines outside of houses. You're still seeing lots of offers. You're still seeing prices getting bid up. The mortgage rates should have the effect of cooling the market a little bit, but it's also fighting an uphill battle because of inventory that's still declining. So is that going to cause a huge change in the market? No, because mortgage rates changing doesn't cause people to not want to buy or need to buy homes. It just takes the people who are on the fence, it takes them out of the market, and it cools off the excess pricing wars. But again, drop in the bucket, same way these foreclosures, I don't see any scenario based on all the reality that says that any of this stuff is going to lead to an immediate change or a significant change. So what will? I don't know. Short of a catastrophic event, something like COVID or something massive on a nationwide political scale or economic scale, unexpected. Short of something like that, it's going to have to be a combination of factors that over time eventually changes this market balance. But it doesn't. We have such a far way to go to get back to where we're in a balanced market. We're going to have to take a lot of buyers out of the market, and we're going to have a lot of sellers come into the market before we get back to where prices flatten, let alone decrease. And I'm not saying that it can't happen. Eventually it must, because prices can't keep going up like this. Eventually affordability will get out of control, and that will be the reason that people stop buying. But there's no sign that we're approaching that yet, especially here in our marketplace where affordability index is still actually pretty good compared to a lot of parts of the country. So what does this mean for all of us? In the real estate profession, it means that when we have buyers that are saying, hey, I don't want to buy now because prices are so high, well, that's looking at the past. And prices are so high compared to a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And interest rates are too. But what are they? We can't buy in the past. You can only buy today or you can buy in the future. And all of the information that I see says that prices are going to continue rising for the foreseeable future. And with supply looking like it looks right now, they're going to continue rising pretty rapidly. So you can't buy in the past. You can buy today or you can buy in the future. And if you're saying, hey, today's a bad time to buy because of prices and rates, I think you're looking in the wrong direction. I think if you look in the future, for the foreseeable 12, 18-month future, prices are going to continue rising and maybe even beyond that. So I would say that if you're considering buying and you think that it's financially a bad time for the market, don't think that. I would buy, and I mean I'm looking at opportunities to buy right now. So I'm putting my money where my mouth is with that. You have to be able to afford it. You can't become house poor. So if that's the case, don't do that. But if you're looking purely at financials and saying the timing is bad, I think you need to look again and see what you can do to get into a home. I'll close with a story. I had a client who was looking at homes in the spring of 2020. And at the time, she was looking for a home around $175,000 in a specific school district where her kids go to school. And she was maxed out at that price point. She couldn't, depending on the property taxes, she couldn't go much above that. And she wanted to make some offers, and it was like, oh, I want to offer under list, or maybe I'll give them a list price or $1,000 more, but I'm not gonna go above that. Or maybe it was like, I like this house, but not quite enough. I'll keep looking. And unfortunately, what happened is she ended up getting priced out of the market. So she was never able to buy a home. And in fact, she did inquire not long ago and said, hey, I'd like to revisit this. And I said, well, are you making a lot more money now? Because here's what's going on with prices in the areas you're looking at. They were up, I think it was about 25%. So whatever house you were looking at for 175 then is going to cost you like 220, 225 now, are you making that much more money to where your monthly budget has changed enough that you can, and remember, you didn't like what was 175 then, so you're not going to like what's 225 now. You're going to need to look at like 250 in order to find the sort of house that you want. And unfortunately, the answer is no. Her income has not gone up that much to be able to increase her price point by $75,000. What's really, I guess, disappointing, or it's challenging for me in this scenario, is that if we would have been able to get her to see that it really was a good idea to do what she had to do to buy a home at that time, she probably would have made more money owning the house over the last year and a half than she made at her job. And that's not even accounting for things like having the tax deductions for your property taxes and mortgage interest and the pride of home ownership and your principal reduction. I mean, it's not accounting for any of that stuff. It's just accounting for the increase in value of the home. And I wish we could have helped her better. And we're in a position today where you need to help your clients in the same way. You can't predict the future, and neither can I. And yet this is a really thorough look at what the reality of the market is and what might happen with predictable changes. And you can't help it if there's a World War III. Nobody can predict that. But based on all the actual market information, this is going to keep going. And if you have a buyer who's thinking about it and is on the fence right now, do what you can to get them to buy a house, and they'll thank you a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, when they've been able to live in a home when they otherwise would have been priced out of the market. So hopefully this is helpful. If you want any of my data sources, any of my information, my math, feel free to drop me a message, and I'll be happy to share all this with you. And let me know if you have any questions. Like I said, hopefully this is helpful, and this will help you run your business, help your clients, and become the market expert. So